Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Panic Roll Game podcast. I am Will.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Johnny.
And today we are going to be discussing our 3 favourite games. So, who wants to go first?
Well, Will, you love revealing yourself, so...
I mean, that is true. I can go first. So, my first one is actually Metal Gear Solid 1. Firstly, it's the only modern day shooting game that I like. I typically don't like games like Call of Duty and stuff like this, but I like the stealth aspect. Also as well, it's the game that my friend John introduced me to. We kind of spent a lot of time bonding over the Metal Gear Solid series in general, and it's also the only PlayStation 1 game I've ever beaten.
Probably the only game you've ever beaten. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Shots
He will
fired.
never fully recover. I want to clarify, all of my top 3 picks I have actually beaten.
Oh, damn.
That was like one of my criteria when I was picking these 3. But yeah, so I also just love the game's lore. It's just great, and the bosses are awesome. It's got the perfect playtime length to it as well. It's short enough that I can play it, and by the time I get to the end of it, I'm just getting bored of it. So I can complete a playthrough, but then go away for several months before doing another playthrough. But it's not so long that I'm likely to give up mid-playthrough, which is the issue I've been having a lot of these last couple of years.
Do you find it like refreshing when you come back playing it again and again, or do you feel like it's kind of just the same game again?
I think I leave a big enough a gap between playthroughs that it is refreshing. I leave it long enough that I've forgotten just enough of it that I can play through again and it still feels fresh. Funnily enough, I did put down as my backups Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4 because they have more of an emotional impact for me. The reason that I didn't put them down though and put 1 down is because I've only completed 3 and 4 once each.
Okay.
Whereas Metal Gear Solid 1 I've completed about 10 times at least.
A fun thing we could also talk about is within like our favorite games is also if there's been any remasters or remakes. Because one thing I really appreciated, so FYI, Will played the remake and shared with us his experience of playing with it. And there was one really cool thing, which was, what's the name again? Like Phantom something?
Oh, Psycho Mantis.
Psycho Mantis. As a really cool mechanic that relies on you like switching the controller from one port to another port.
Yeah.
But then they did a really cool way of then updating that for the remake on PC. And I was just like, attention to detail. Beautiful. Beautiful.
That was with the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection, Volume 1, that it was called. And they also emulated the Psycho Mantis reading your save data.
Love that.
Which
Love that
is
attention to detail.
fantastic.
Yeah, I've never known another game to do something like that.
Me neither.
It's pretty unique.
So out of the box.
That's another reason why I love that game.
Just insert that meme of Lady Gaga of like, brilliant, never been done before, incredible.
Oh my god, yeah. Just chef's kiss. Perfect. Anyway, so who wants to go next then?
Don't mind.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, all right, I'll go next. I'm the kind of person who just will play the same, like, 7 games over and over throughout the year until something else really good comes out. In particular, I tend to really get into, like, a specific franchise, and I'll play all of the games within that franchise, you know, like Half-Life and Dark Souls and Resident Evil and so on. So I have, like, the past couple of days when I've been thinking through this, I found it really tough to settle on, like, the one within each of those. So my number 1 on my list is the original Half-Life game. So the original Half-Life game, I think it came out in 1998. It's my number 1 for a number of reasons. I mean, I grew up watching my dad play it on the PC. I was that kid who, when he wasn't there, I would go onto the PC, play on his save, and like overwrite it. And I did that with Half-Life 2 as well. So when the original like Xbox first came out, he got Half-Life 2 on that. And there was one night where I sort of snuck downstairs while everyone was in bed, and I sat and played Half-Life 2, finished it in one night and accidentally overwrote his save. So he came down the next morning and the game was just completed. And what's really sad is that was the last time he ever played a Half-Life game. I think I ruined it for him.
No. You ruined your dad's Half-Life 2 experience.
But the original Half-Life game, it shaped modern day shooters. It was completely original and unique, and it's, the impact it's had on the industry now, was life-changing for a number of gaming industries. But also, alongside that, the other cool mechanics they had was just this idea of a silent protagonist. Like, so many games go with like scripted dialogue and things like that, but this was the first game, I don't know if it's the first game ever that's done it, but it's certainly the first game that I know that's had a silent protagonist. And I've watched all the interviews with Valve about that, and just this idea of the character, you're in control, and the idea of a silent character meaning you can kind of think and say to yourself what you want at that point in the game, and there's no dialogue that's like forced upon you. As you know, I hate dialogue in games, as Will and Johnny can attest to. If I have to sit and listen to something, I'll just start freaking out. So I think in terms of what that original Half-Life game did for the gaming industry, it's got to go in my number one spot. And even though it's the same game every time I play it, it still feels different. I can go through and say, okay, this time I'm going to play through with a shotgun or with the pistol, or I'm going to do like a crowbar only run or something. So every time I play it, it still feels just as refreshing and as fun, as it did when I first played it. The story's amazing. It's the idea of a massive catastrophe in an underground lab. What's not to love?
I don't know if it was the first game to do silent protagonist, because you had games like Legend of Zelda, but it definitely helped popularize it.
It certainly set a standard as well.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah. But, I love all of the Half-Life franchise. I love what Half-Life Alyx has tried to do for the VR industry as well. Every Half-Life game has done something for the industry. The first game shaped the first-person shooter aspect of gaming. The second game came out with a Source engine, which shaped modding for a lot of people. Half-Life Alyx has set the industry standard for what a really good AAA VR game should be. Every Half-Life game has set a bar. So I've got a lot of respect for Valve and what they've done.
Yeah. Half-Life is one of those where I personally don't enjoy it, but I do appreciate the impact that it had on the gaming landscape.
Me too.
Yeah, you have to.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's it. People don't know it, but the game they're playing in some way has probably been shaped by one of the Half-Life games. It's, really far-reaching.
But also such a cool world and such a cool lore.
Yeah, the story's amazing.
It's a shame they never made a movie out of it, but then at the same time... Oh,
God, I wish they would.
If they ever did make a movie out of it, it would just be terrible. Like, they'd find a way to destroy it, wouldn't they?
I wouldn't want it to be like the Assassin's Creed movie or, something like that.
Yeah.
Give it the Fallout Prime treatment. Like, that's what it needs.
Yeah.
Although one thing that you pointed out actually to me with it that it didn't shape is no other kind of first person shooters or anything have ever replicated the kind of physics-based puzzles that Half-Life did. Which is a weird thing to think about.
That's a good point. I feel like puzzles kind of got sidelined into adventure games, whereas first-person shooters became very online play. I'm thinking of like your CODs.
Don't think about fish, Johnny. This is a gaming podcast.
And again, it was Counter-Strike,
that Counter-Strike
did that, and set that kind of standard for COD and all of that.
Well, Counter-Strike was originally a mod for, wasn't it Team Fortress originally?
Yeah, sorry. You're right. Team Fortress came first, then Counter-Strike afterwards. Also, one of the characters from the Half-Life universe, the G-Man, to this day is, I think, still in the number one slot for, the gaming industry's most mysterious characters. There's just so many cool things have come out of the Half-Life games. It's amazing.
That's partly just because they won't make a third one, but yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
You keep saying that, my love. It'll be fine.
It has to be.
Okay, so Half-Life 1 for Ben then. So, Johnny, you're up.
The Sims is going to be my first one. And I did go for The Sims 4. In all of my points, I also then referenced The Sims 2 and The Sims 3 because, well, The Sims 4 is great. It is lacking. So generally, my main thing about The Sims 4 is just the creativity and the building tools are just the best in the series. And they've really refined those tools over time. A big con is limited by like the new worlds and the world layout and designs. It's just not got the same charm and feel and kind of creativity from The Sims 2 and 3 because it's like limited worlds, neighborhood kind of setup that they have now, and like you have to be very picky and choosy about what you place where. You can't like do up the whole neighborhood from scratch if you wanted to. For example, one thing I really like is having custom content to put into the games. So on The Sims 3, you could do a full overhaul, make a whole world the way you want it. On Sims 2 and Sims 3. Make like a medieval world if you want, but that's really hard and really limiting with The Sims 4. Another con is just the gameplay. The kind of game feel is really lacking. So while the creativity and the building tools are out of this world, it lacks that kind of like little bit of fun and a little bit of polish as well from The Sims 2 and Sims 3. So I mainly just play the game to build pretty houses and build fun Sims.
Surely one of the biggest cons must just be that it's made by EA themselves.
I mean, yeah.
Well, that's the thing is, I would put that as a con, but then that applies to all three of the games. And as extortionate as the games are, The Sims 2 and 3 also kind of had those problems of like, you buy one base game and then you're spending hundreds adding onto it, and to the point where once you add too many, the game literally turns around and tells you, don't install all of this content because it won't run, which is like GG.
But I'm thinking more of like, wasn't there an issue recently where they updated Sims 4 and it just broke everything?
Oh, every update breaks something and fixes something else. It's a constant cycle.
But it's mind-blowing that they get away with it.
That is not a thing that's independent to The Sims, unfortunately. That's a lot of games now. Most games are dropped and then have a day one patch because there's so much wrong with it, because of game crunch.
But we're not on about day one, though. You know, the update that they just did for Sims 4, the game's been out for years, and from what I hear, it's just a lot of EA being really lazy and relying on the community to do everything for them, whilst then charging such an amount for all their games when really they do sweet FA.
It's disgusting. The problem is, as well, and the thing about The Sims 4 is it's such a unique game. There isn't a lot of other things on the market that is anything like it, or if there are, they're not up to the same standard. And there are things in development which everyone's really excited for, but one of the latest projects that was about to come into that space has been cancelled. Another one just seems forever being pushed back and being worked on. It has its niche little market and it owns it, and it really does need someone to come in and disturb it because it's getting to a point where it's just ridiculous. But that is one thing that I really love The Sims 4 for, is the community. It's the people who are adding things to the gallery, the modding community, who, as you said, Ben, are just going in and fixing the game because it's so broken, adding new functionality that just should be there in the first place. While there is always going to be a toxic element to any community, I think there's a really strong, good people within that community, which is just really nice. It's nice to see. You've got mods such as there's someone who makes like the pets playable, because why is that not just a function you can toggle on and off? There's someone who's done a full overhaul of the build by and has just made it work so much better, down to even like a multiplayer mod. Like, people are adding like such overhaul functionalities that just stop adding aesthetic packs and add actual gameplay, you know, like yeah, it's ridiculous.
What's the mod where the toddlers would like kill the adults?
Oh, that one's
toddlers
fantastic.
with knives or something.
And also, just not so much now, but back in the day of like Sims 2 and Sims 3, the ownership of the space of just like storytelling and like you make the game what you want it to be, it was one of the biggest spaces for like machinima. Kind of grew that space, and I thought that was just really cool. It's just people being able to express themselves and create things and share stories. Yeah, it's essentially virtual dolls, but it's great.
So it's better round to me again, which is a Dark Souls game. There are several reasons I went for 1 over 3 and 2. Firstly, it's the only real game in the trilogy where I feel comfortable enough with it that I can beat it using virtually any build that I pick. So my last playthrough, for instance, was one where I was seeing if I could beat the game just using the starting gear of the thief, which is instantly the bandit's knife, which is the most powerful knife in the game. But still, it's more the fact that I had the confidence to be able to do that I wouldn't have in the other two games. With Dark Souls 3, for example, I've only just recently beat it with a sorcery build, and I found it infinitely tougher than beating 1 or 2 with a sorcery build because of the whole Osiris and Lothric Lorien roadblock.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't feel that there's a roadblock like that in the other two games, but especially 1 as well. It feels like whatever build I use, they're all of like a similar difficulty ultimately, just different playstyles. So I feel it got the balancing better in that one. Secondly, the interconnectivity of the world, which is one that everyone always points to. I love how interconnected the world is, because in later games there was sort of an over-reliance on your ability to teleport between bonfires immediately. Like, for instance, with 2, it is essentially there are several different linear paths to go down. There is an optimal order in which you have to beat them. So it's going to like Forest of Fallen Giants first, and then going down the Hyde's Tower of Flame route. Once you beat No Man's Wharf and all that stuff, then going to Huntsman's Copse. And then all that stuff. And then with 3, it is just literally a linear path with a couple of... They're like forks in the road, but the tangential fork is very short. And either leads to a dead end or just loops you back round on itself, like the Demon Ruins and Smouldering Lake.
So does Dark Souls 1 have a lot more like, I know I'm going to go there later, or you go somewhere and you're like, oh, I'm back here?
Yeah, so the big example that everyone points to when you first start the game, so you start at Firelink Shrine after you get out of the Undead Asylum, and then you go through Undead Burg and Undead Parish, and then you unlock a shortcut lift back to Firelink Shrine for the Gargoyles boss fight.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really happen so much in 2 and 3. Like, you do get shortcuts, but they're usually shortcuts within that level. They're not between areas, which is something I really like. Also, even though there is an order in which we're meant to do it, if you want to in 1, you can go straight to the catacombs. You'll be massively outclassed by every skeleton you meet in there, but you can do it and you can rush through it to get some weapons that you need for a faith build, for example. If you want to do that, you can get the Master Key and go to Valley of Drakes and pick up the Astora Straightsword if you want to. There's also several areas in the game that are just completely optional if they're not critical to your build. For example, if you're not doing a normal upgrade path for your weapon, you have no need to go to the depths or the lower undead settlement, because you will never need the large ember, because from +5 it goes to like pyromancy and all that kind of stuff, so you don't need to go to those areas. You can skip Blighttown even without the Master Key. I've only gone through Blighttown once in all my playthroughs, because every other time I've just gone, I'm going to skip this, where that's either using the Master Key or just going the back route through the Valley of the Drakes.
Yeah.
Thirdly is kind of more of a thing to do with the Souls games in general. The combat in it is so damn satisfying. It is the most satisfying combat of any game series I've played. There are no other games I've played where it feels as satisfying to kill just generic enemies, let alone the bosses. The other reason why I chose 1, this was the primary factor. It has the least areas that I dislike in it. In the other 2 games, there will get to a certain area where I'm like, I can't skip this area. I'm gonna have to beat it to proceed, but I can't be arsed, and so I quit and leave for another day. Or I just abandon the playthrough.
It's giving, we can't go under it, we can't go over it, we have to go
We'll
through
have to
it.
give up.
We'll have to put the game down and walk away.
In Dark Souls 2, that's No Man's Wharf. I just hate that place. And in Dark Souls 3, that's the Catacombs of Carthus and just Irithyll in general, both the dungeon and of the Boreal Valley, just because sod both those areas. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, there isn't an area like that in the game for me that isn't just completely optional.
Okay.
That makes sense.
It's going to be very interesting in a moment.
Oh god, Ben went for 3, didn't he?
Whoa.
Yeah, so I went for Dark Souls 3 as my second favourite game.
I bloody knew it!
For me, I quite like the fact that it's more of a linear game. Like, I know what I'm doing, I know where I'm going. I think, for me, Dark Souls 1 is cool, and I love the idea of having like a central hub that you keep returning to, but it is just the dated mechanics, like not being able to move where you're drinking your Estus, and the button queuing. If I'm trying to do a bunch of stuff and I tap circle, I know that he's going to do the roll after he's done with his other animation. It's just little things like that make the game feel less fluent and flexible to me. Whereas, you know, the later Souls games like Dark Souls 3, even the newer Demon Souls game, Elden Ring, it's much more fluid in terms of its movement and mechanics. And I like that because I can react to things quicker, and it just feels more immersive. If I die, like, it's my fault. It's not the mechanics, it's purely because of me. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, I'll more blame things on, like, oh, he's taking 10 minutes to drink his Estus thing, and I just find it really annoying. The Demon Souls remake, I wish that could have made it to my list. If they would just hurry up and make a PC port, then we can all have on this.
I want to play the PC port of it.
I was watching Fighting Cowboy at the moment. If you love Dark Souls content, good God, go and check out his channel. He's at the moment doing like a Souls-a-thon. So he's doing a marathon running through all of the Soulsborne games. The first game in his marathon is Demon Souls. That game is just a visual orgasm. Everything, the animations are so... Like, I can't wait for you, Will, to experience the Demon Souls remake. It's such a fluid, beautiful game.
Don't say that after calling it a visual orgasm.
It's a visual orgasm. I can't wait for you to have a visual orgasm.
No, like, honestly, you know, like one of those, oh, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy. I would wish this on everyone just to experience where it's like the lighting effects and the shadow. Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah. Anyway, this game wasn't my number 2, so I need to stop talking about it. But Dark Souls 3, I think it's because it was the first Dark Souls game that I played. So I started out on Bloodborne, loved it. And then with Dark Souls 3, it was the first one that I played. So I'm just more familiar with it in general. But even though it's quite linear and it's the same bosses, I think I've pretty much now completed that game with every build I can think of, apart from obscure things like a bow build or something stupid. But every other type of build you can do, you know, I've done. I like as well the nature of the Souls games is all of the lore is there if you want it. If you want to read through things you can, but otherwise you can just get on with the game, and I really enjoy that. I don't like, as I said with Half-Life, I don't like things being sort of forced on me.
God forbid there be dialogue.
Yeah, it's another one of those games where, you know, it just kind of throws you into this world and says, off you go. And I just love it. The combat, the story that's there, the challenge, all those kind of get-good moments. It definitely has those pinch points that Will was talking about. Like if you're doing a sorcery build and you go against Osiris, it's horrific, but it can be done. But there are definitely moments where just the scaling and the resistances of enemies will set you up to fail, and a lot of people would give up on them. But no, for me, it will always be, I think, my number 1 Souls game. I think it was a close cut between things like Demon Souls and Bloodborne. It's ironic because I've got way more hours in Elden Ring than any of the other Souls games.
Oh, same.
Dark Souls 3 is always that nostalgic kind of go-to. I can play it over and over again and never ever get bored. We're doing a Dark Souls race on the channel at the moment as well with Dark Souls 3. I just love the game to bits.
Yeah, just because a game is long doesn't mean it's good.
Fun fact about a Dark Souls race. My most recent playthrough of Dark Souls 3, I beat the game using the build that Ben is using for the race, and now I'm worried. But we can't pass on talking about you and Dark Souls without talking about your penchant for murdering the NPCs. And that beautiful piece of karma in Elden Ring when you were playing it last time, where we said...
Oh, this was the DLC, wasn't it?
Yeah, you were playing Shadow of the Erdtree. We said, Ben, don't, because it's going to be Souls law. That one NPC has the item you need, and you know what? We bloody called it.
The NPC should have spoken to me. I was insulted.
Oh, if it spoke to you, you'd have just skipped the dialogue anyway. Let's not beat around the bush.
I know, but I want to be able to skip the dialogue. It's the fact that they didn't even talk, and I pressed a button. They flat out ignored me, so I was like, all right, then I'll just kill you. And then, later on I needed an item, and Will, being the wiki man for me while I'm trying to play, searched it up, and he was just laughing to himself like, yep, it's that NPC that you killed way earlier on that I told you not to kill.
It was that whole thing of like, the NPC wouldn't talk to you because...
they were an arsehole.
No, it was you need to be wearing a helmet transmuted from the boss that you just killed.
Yeah, it's that big lion helmet, isn't it?
And the game's way of telling you that was to have a lion's head on like a bench near them.
And what's annoying is after you said that, I was like, oh yeah, of course. And that's the other thing I love about those games is just the subtlety with everything. The game never tells you what to do, but in a way, if you look hard enough, it always kind of does. It's a very, the more you look, the more rewarding it is.
This is the thing that would drive me wild about these kind of games. Stuff like that, I just feel is such a blocker on top of them being so difficult. The fact that you can kill an NPC that locks you out of a whole bit, it's just like, oh no, that would make me very upset.
Well, it's like when I was... What one was it? It must have been Dark Souls 1 in Anor Londo when I accidentally got the blacksmith killed.
Oh, yeah.
And that was the only blacksmith that could upgrade a thing. So yeah, there are definitely things that can happen that just ruin a playthrough for you. But I love the fact that even now, because Will and I always watch each other play the games when we play them, and even now, years and years later, I'll be playing through and Will will be like, oh my god, I didn't know you could do that. Or I'll be watching him and be like, you can do that. And even after all this time, we still learn new things, which I love.
Yeah, so Pokemon. Interestingly enough, I was going to go with Heart Gold, Soul Silver. But then I decided, no, actually, if I think about what's really like my core, I went for Ruby. What I specifically went for was the remake of that one called Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. So Heart Gold, Soul Silver, mainly I love that game for the nostalgia, but on recent playthroughs, I've actually realized just how much is kind of, well, that world and that game heavily based in nostalgia. There's a lot of blockers and a lot of actual things that make the game not as great as it was in my memory. For example, that game is a remake of the second game in the series. For context, you start off the Pokemon game, this region called the Kanto region, and then the second game, you go to the Johto region, and a big twist at the end, or the kind of midpoint of that game, is that you then go back into the Kanto region and the whole thing was connected, and you're like, oh wow, crazy. Which sounds great in principle, but the way that it was actually delivered in that game isn't actually that great, because you're kind of post-game content and you're kind of just sweeping your way through. There's not much of a story. It's great for the element of playing it for the first time and going, oh, so this is how the world is now. I think it's this game set like a year or 10 years after the first game, so the world has changed a little bit, but it's still kind of same world that you knew. But then there's a lot of new Pokemon that were introduced in that game that weren't available until the post game, and just the pure fact that it's like, oh, I want to play through this game with this Pokemon, but I can't because it's locked behind the post game, is just kind of really silly. And actually a lot of those Pokemon have become fan favorites through the third game in the series, which is Ruby and Sapphire. A great example is like Houndour. That's actually a Gen 2 Pokemon, but it's really well known because it was actually more readily available within the third games than it was in the second games, because it was post-game content.
So do the Pokemon games have like the equivalent of a New Game Plus? Because you're saying the post-games, so can you not just get to the end of the game, beat it, and then get them Pokemon and play again?
Not really. So the Pokemon games are all kind of based on the trading aspect. So when you restart a game, you have to do a hard reset and wipe your save file, because otherwise you could just rack up loads of Pokemon really easily if you could have multiple save files or multiple saves on the same device.
Oh, damn.
So it's to encourage trading, they kind of put a hard blocker on it. But in later games, that ways to work around that. So my first Pokemon game ever was Pokemon Emerald, which is of the same series. So you got Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire came at the same time, and then as a third game on top of that was Emerald. So there's a lot of nostalgia for the Hoenn region, which is the region
the
from
Hoenn
that
region. There's one of those downtown, I think.
That's where your mum's from.
And we've suddenly reverted to like 13-year-old Call of Duty players.
It was about to happen. I was talking about Pokemon, so...
I mean, I still stand by that Pokemon is really just glorified cockfighting.
What kind of cockfighting have you been watching?
Well, I don't understand. Pokemon is like... I'm going to go off a massive tangent. Pokemon's basically saying to all these kids, hey, you know what? Pen these two animals together and make them fight, but somehow cockfighting is illegal. Am I supposed to be like, oh, my rooster's a fucking water type, it drinks blood. Oh, mine's electric type, it's got a 9-volt battery up its... What? It's still cockfighting.
Now, you're thinking of Pal World.
My hen's a fire type, it's got a fucking flamethrower.
It's all Terminator. Imagine that. You're into cockfighting and old little Penelope or Rooster. Along comes my Rooster Arnold Schwarzenegger with a flamethrower.
Anyway, what I was going to say is I've picked Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire because it's a remake of the first game that I've really got into, of the third generation. And kind of speaking to what you were saying earlier, Will, it has a lot more Pokemon in it. So it's got a good mix versus like the first gen where you've got 150 Pokemon. Gets a bit stale after this long. It's good to have a lot to choose from. But also, it got the nostalgia factor, but also combine it with Mega Evolution, which is one of the best things that they've done in the series. And this was like the peak of it in my mind, because they just had such a good way of incorporating it into the narrative and doing a remake rather than just a straight up one-to-one remake. They added to the world and made it like an evolved version of those previous games, a bit like what I was saying about Heart Gold and Soul Silver earlier. It's like you've seen how the world has evolved since the first games, so it's nostalgic but something fresh and new, and they do that with the story as well, which is just really nice to see. Also, it's the first game where I ever actually got into shiny hunting and spent hours actually getting into that, which is really fun. And not quite this game, is more this generation with XY and with Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. It was the first games in the series where I actually got to play Pokemon alongside other people, which is the way it's supposed to be played. And there was even a time where me and Will and a couple of other flatmates at uni, we had like a Wonder Trade battle where we just got random Pokemon and then just all had like a kind of battle championship, which was just incredible to be able to do something like that as
that
little
was great.
That one kid who plays Pokemon and has no friends who plays Pokemon growing up. It was just amazing to be able to have that kind of experience. So just being able to be part of that live Pokemon experience and the community aspect of it with both online and with just actual physical people and having that experience was just chef's kiss. It was the way the games are supposed to be played. And my last thing to say on these games as well is, particularly with the Hoenn games, their big focus was on like the environment and nature. And one of my favorite things in just any piece of media is the topic of like nature versus technology, which is an overriding theme within Pokemon anyway. But they really hit it home during this game in particular, because the legendary Pokemon of this game are all about destroying the world with fire or with water. It's all about that kind of like finding the balance, which is just pinnacle Pokemon, I think. I don't think they've really hit a storyline as hard since that one. A other cool thing they did is this was also at a point where the games series was really hitting a too many legendaries problem. I think they had about like 30 to 40, maybe even 50 legendaries at this point. But they had a neat solution that they introduced in this game, which was like these little portals you'd go through, and then you'd have to do this mini game, and then you would go to these secret locations and find the legendaries, which was like a nice little neat treasure hunt element to it, which was just a nice little solution rather than, hey, we're just going to put out another event for you to download this thing and get it for free. It was actually engaging gameplay. And also on that piece of the whole flying around mini game, they really dove into the fact that this was 3D on a 3D platform and just had fun with it, which was just really nice to see Nintendo doing creative fun stuff with the 3DS generation.
And not to mention as well, for a lot of people, that would have been the first time they would have reasonably been able to get access to those legendaries, because they would have been locked behind a lot of the earlier gen games, which were a lot more difficult to get hold of.
For sure. That's my 2 cents on Pokemon.
So this one has a bit of a story to it, because this isn't the Lord of the Rings game that you would think that I would pick.
I hope it's not Shadow of Mordor.
No, it's not.
Oh, is it Conquest? Because I love Lord of the Rings Conquest.
Is this the one that you played religiously non-stop during second year? Like, to a point where it to be like, are you okay? You know that you're at uni, right? Like, you need to go to classes.
I think that was Shadow of War.
Okay.
No, it's not that. I nearly put Lord of the Rings Return of the King for the PS2.
That's a great game.
It is a fantastic game, and I have great memories of playing that game with my brother. However, there is one game that beats it.
Is it the turn-taking one?
Yeah, this is going to be a controversial one. I actually picked Lord of the Rings The Third Age, which is the turn-based RPG that used the same combat system as Final Fantasy X.
Oh, damn.
The reason why I picked it is because, firstly, I love turn-based combat games as opposed to real-time games. Third Age is one of the only RPGs of its kind, I mean like Final Fantasy, like grand scale type, that I've actually ever fully completed. I love the combat system in that game. I love the combat system in the Third Age so much that one of the main reasons I wanted to go into games development was so that I could make my own RPG replicating that turn-based systems. All of the animations and sound effects for that game are incredible. Every single attack animation feels weighty. When you kill an orc, for example, they jump over onto their back and then die and spasm and stuff, which is great. When a character gets shot by an arrow, they actually have an arrow impaled in them. All the impact sounds are great and fantastic. And also as well with the combat system, it's one of those where in order for you to advance in it, you have to use the skills in your skill tree, which steers you away from a massive problem I have in a load of Final Fantasy games, which is where I'm mana hoarding because I'm thinking, don't use a skill now because I might need it later. Whereas with Third Age, the only way that you unlock new skills is by using the skills in the tree that you've already unlocked. And so it encourages you to experiment with those skills to find out what the strengths and weaknesses of enemies are. Also, I love the evil mode in that game.
Evil mode?
It's the only game I know of its kind that has an evil mode where you get to play as the villains.
Oh, cool.
After you beat each area of the game, you can exit out of the game and load up evil mode from your save, which allows you to play several of the significant battles of the area that you've just beaten as the villain parties in those battles, using the exact same movesets that they have access to when you fought them. The other thing with this is when you beat the evil mode, you also get unique items and things that you can then import into your saves, which mean that you can either use them to enhance your current playthrough that you're doing, or you can beat the game on one save, then do the evil modes in that save, and then import the items into a different save to give yourself like a pseudo new game plus boost for doing like the harder playthroughs, which is really cool.
That is just not something you would see on a game now.
Oh no, definitely not.
That is crazy how cool that is.
Oh yeah. For example, in evil mode, you can play as the Balrog fighting Gandalf on the bridge of Khazad-dûm.
Damn.
I see why this wins now.
And you can play as the Watcher in the Water when you enter Moria.
Oh.
And all these kind of things, which are just really cool. I will say though, the game isn't perfect. It does have its faults. The main fault of the game, which everyone always points out when this game is brought up, is its story. Its story starts really strong. The premise is you are following in the wake of the Fellowship. You're playing as a Gondorian called Berethor, who has been sent on an assignment to go and meet up with Boromir. And then hijinks ensue and all that stuff. The two main issues with the story are, I feel that they didn't do enough with the premise they had. It would have been cool if the Fellowship's actions impacted your story a lot more. For example, when the Fellowship go to Moria, have the encounter with the Watcher in the Water, and Moria gets blocked off from that entrance. That would have been a cool thing for you to be like, oh, the Watcher's blocked off this passage, your mission is to find another way into Moria. But they didn't. They just kind of did your party managed to sneak in behind the Fellowship just before the Watcher broke the door. Which you don't see in the film, and means that you should have caught up to the Fellowship, but actually you haven't, because suddenly the Fellowship is halfway through Moria.
Yeah.
It's very janky the way they've integrated it in some places. The other thing as well is the plot just takes a nosedive in the second half. Once you reach Rohan, the plot gets wild. It literally ends with you fighting the Eye of Sauron at the top of Barad-dûr.
What?
I love this.
That is the final fight of the game.
You're saying that's a problem?
The best part is, in evil mode, you get to play as the Eye of Sauron.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
Again, you're saying this is a problem?
Yeah.
Why? I'm going to completely disagree with you that I think that sounds like a massive upgrade. They had the opportunity and they seized it to just do whatever the hell they wanted. And that sounds fantastic. It's not a movie, it's a video game. You want the wild, the stupid, and the spectacle. Like,
the second major thing, which is a mark against the game for me, I wish it was more open, because the game is very linear. There is overworld free roam, but it's in like a linear map with only a couple of forks in the road which are more dead ends, so there's no alternate paths you can take or anything like that. So it is just very much a you go from A to B, pick up items from chests, that's it. So I wish there was more open world exploration and more side content. Although there are side missions, it's just you go to this part of the map, beat this enemy, and that's it. If you explore all of the map of every area, you will just naturally beat the side content, which is kind of a shame. I'd have kind of liked more Final Fantasy-esque. You have the overworld map where you're travelling over Middle-earth, and then maybe you enter into a key area or a dungeon or a settlement and do some stuff in there, and then go back to the overworld map and do that kind of stuff. That could have made the game a lot better in my opinion. But yeah, I've rambled on long enough. That's why I had to pick Third Age. And also I just love Lord of the Rings in general.
Yeah, I definitely want to watch you play it. I'm invested now. I want to see him sword fight the Eye of Sauron or something. I mean, yeah, I would have thought he would have picked like The Return of the King, like that kind of game.
I nearly did pick Return of the King, to be fair, because that is a brilliant game.
Yeah, I remember playing that game. It's wonderful.
I mean, that's enough about me ranting about Third Age.
Good luck to editing, Will. Who's going to make sense of all of that? Damn.
Oh, yeah. That's going to take like half the podcast.
The third game on my list, which could easily be number 1, but is somehow at number 3, is Outer Wilds. Again, this is my thoughts on the game, but it's also just a massive plea for people to go and play it if you haven't already. It's made by, they're called Mobius Digital, a developer team that sort of made this game as part of like a college project, essentially, and it turned into, you know, this massively successful game on Steam. You know, it's got 60,000 overwhelmingly positive reviews. It's an amazing game. For me, even though I don't have loads of hours on record playing it, it's a game that has just ticked every box for me. Every element of its design is just phenomenal, from the visuals to the soundtrack to the story to the mechanics. Everything is just stunning in this game. So essentially, you are a Harthian. You're this creature that starts out on this planet, and you're just thrown into this universe where all these planets are moving around you in real time, and all we know is that every 22 minutes the sun explodes, but somehow you wake up again, so you're caught in this time loop. It's very similar to old games, a bit like no one here is going to be old enough to play them, but games like Myst.
I was going to say, is it like Myst?
Where the world is unfolding around you in real time. So as the time is passing, things are happening on those other planets, and it's just down to you to go and explore and figure out the mystery behind what's going on and why the universe is ending every 22 minutes.
God, we're really showing our age with that Myst reference, aren't we?
Well, it's the only other game that I know that does kind of real-timey world problem puzzle solving things like this, but Outer Wilds does it in a much better way, because everything happens in real time. Fun fact for you, the developers wanted to add an achievement into the game if you could make the game crash by putting your ship on one planet, putting your little scout camera on another planet, and then you personally going to another planet, because that will force the game to keep all of those entities up to date in real time. But Steam were like, no, you can't do that. You can't put an achievement on to make people crash the game. But yeah, so the story behind all of it is just phenomenal. It is one of those that the more you explore, the more you learn. And also, out of all the games I've ever played, it's easily the most terrifying. I've played loads of horror games, from Outlast to Alien Isolation to the Resident Evil games, whatever. The most terrifying game you can think of, I've probably played it. Like Phasmophobia, none of them come close to Outer Wilds, because Outer Wilds is atmospherically terrifying. They do such a good job on the visuals and the sound design that you are immersed in that world. So there's one moment where you fly down onto a planet. From the outside, you can't see what's going on. It's like a dust planet, essentially. But once you break through its atmosphere and come down, there are just these tornadoes flying through the sky and things, and I literally myself. Or there's another planet you go to where there's these big creatures that just come out of the mist and get you. It's terrifying. But as I say, it's easily got just one of the most interesting stories I've ever experienced in a game ever. And I'm still learning things about it now. You know, I'll watch people play it. The developers did a podcast about the creation of the game and so on. And even now, I'm still learning about different endings that you can get in the game. So I found there's one way of doing it where you can actually meet yourself in the game and have a conversation and share stuff you've learned. But again, I only found that out the other week, and this game came out in 2020. So here I am 4 years later, still learning stuff. So again, it's so tricky to talk about this game because there's so much I want to say, but I can't because it will spoil it for you, which leads me on to why I think it's not my number one. And that's just because once you've beat the game, you know the game. There's no real reason to go back and play it again other than getting all those like alternate endings. So for reference, games like Dark Souls, I've got 300 hours in. Outer Wilds, I've got about 30 hours of playtime in, but it's easily, even though the time spent playing it so much smaller, proportionally the enjoyment I've had has just been so much higher. Like those 30 hours in that game are worth more than the hundreds of hours in any other game I've played. The only thing that knocks it off of the kind of number 1 or 2 spot is just replayability wise. Once you've played it, short of speed running it, there's not really much else you can go back and do, even though there's tons to learn, and I'm still learning stuff now. But once you know it and you've done it, you've kind of done it.
The only kind of warning I would say about it is when I've watched you play it, there have been several times where you've gotten stuck because it is very directionless.
Yeah, it's really, you have to be patient, and I am not a patient person, but it's annoying because you'll have to go away, like you'll be playing it. I've had days where I'll be playing it and I'll be like, how the hell do I do that? And I'll be driving to work or driving back from it the next day and I'll be like, oh my god, I could go and do this. And it just comes down to, you are put in this universe and it's literally just off you go and explore. But you can, for anyone who is similar to me, who's like, no, I won't be patient enough, you can figure everything out in the game if you just look. And that sounds really patronizing, but honestly, flying to all the different planets and just exploring and reading, it's a game where you have to do all that kind of mental work yourself, but it's so worth it from the reward you get from the story.
But Ben, you said you like Dark Souls because you could skip the dialogue.
You can, but what I mean is it's there if you want it. And with Outer Wilds, the base story is there if you want it, but there's so much more there if you want it too.
I think that's just a side effect of the puzzle genre in general. Puzzles, even in a physical sense, they are things that you're going to hit your head against the wall and then think about and come back to and then be like, oh, of course, it was that thing the whole time, or I haven't tried doing that. Yeah, I guess as a not very patient person, that can be infuriating, but it's kind of the design of those games. It's just, I think it's what you expect when you go into them. Greatest one I think of is Portal 2, where it's like very heavily puzzle-based levels, and you are bashing your head against the wall trying to think about where I've got to place all these bits and how I've got to think about momentum and refiring portals as I go through another portal and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you've got to be thinking, playing a little game of chess to figure out all these different pieces and how they're going to go together. That's the fun of it as well, right?
It is, but I'll be honest, like I got to a point in the game where I was like, I have to just look this up because I just don't know. And again, I'm horrifically impatient. But it made me feel better. I was watching again Fighting Cowboy, even though he plays the Dark Souls games, he also played through Outer Wilds at one point. And there was a point later in the game where he's like, I just have to look this up. Like I just can't figure out this thing. And it's annoying because it's one of the things that I actually figured out myself when I was playing it. I was like screaming at the TV like, no, it's over there. But it's interesting how people will struggle with different bits of a puzzle game. So I would love to play it on the channel. It's just finding the right format. It's a wonderful game. Similar to games like Subnautica, I wish that you could just play it with friends. You could all go off in your ships together or explore different, but God, it would be amazing.
I would be terrified.
I know, and I would be enjoying that.
But you know I hate horror games, Ben.
Your fear pleases me.
I think the other difficult part about playing a game like that is, yeah, like you're saying, once you played it through, you've got it, you figured out the puzzles, the replay value is kind of gone. So for someone to come and watch that, they're never going to get to experience that for the first time.
Exactly.
Like you said, when you beat a Dark Souls boss, the feeling of the rush that you get, like, yeah, I did it. Figuring out that puzzle for the first time on your own without any help must feel like such an accomplishment.
It really does. But it's so tricky because I just can't say anything here because people just have to go and play it for themselves. Anything I say would just be like a spoiler, so I can't. You just trust me, go and play it.
Well, I think the premise alone is enough of a draw of the whole world resetting and you having to figure out how the world works.
But like, it's an amazing game, and these guys deserve so much more attention than they got. I think the reason they got knocked, and I don't want anyone who's listening to this to make this mistake, the game that I'm talking about is called Outer Wilds by Mobius Digital. It's not called The Outer Worlds, which is a very, very similar game that came out literally just before this game did. So what happened is the other game came out first and everyone, like all the attention went there. Once again, the game is Outer Wilds, not The Outer Worlds. Go and play it. It's great.
Yeah, but alternative, if you like Fallout games, go play The Outer Worlds. Not sponsored.
Yet.
That'd be a really odd sponsor for like a game that's been out for years already. So, this down to Johnny.
Here we are, the final moment. Will and I have had a secret conversation here while you were off peeing.
A private discussion, have you?
Mm-hmm. And we've both picked another game that we think you will have picked. We were saying that it will probably be a game like Shadow of the Colossus or like Ico or something. And so I ended up settling on Shadow of the Colossus.
And I said Ico.
You know, it's really funny.
Oh, is it neither of them?
No, I couldn't pick between them, so I picked the PS3 remake, which has both games on it, because I want to talk about both.
So we were both right, is that what you're saying?
Where's the kick button?
It's a draw.
Where's the kick
I get
button?
the penalty.
That's not legal.
I didn't know that was possible.
It was on one disc, guys. It's on one disc. It counts.
That doesn't count.
It's on one disc.
If it's on a disc, it counts.
Yeah.
Ref, I demand a recount.
But basically, I'm going to
am
talk about them because
shooketh.
my reasons for both are very similar and they are basically like sister games. So yeah, Eco, it looks like Ico, but apparently it's actually pronounced Eco. It upsets me too. And then
Is it
Shadow
a
of the Colossus.
GIF thing?
It's one of those. Yeah, I disagree, but I'm converted to start calling it Eco now.
I disagree, but I'm British.
So my first kind of note on this is the music, chef's kiss. Storytelling, chef's kiss. The gameplay, great, but boy is it aged. So these are old games, but they are just kind of like similar to what Ben was saying about Half-Life. These games are so fundamental to how a lot of other games played out and how they really shaped the gaming industry in a lot of ways. Shadow of the Colossus, for example, is held up on quite a pedestal, and a lot of people do know about it, but I think they are still massively underrated games just because they are so beautiful. But at the same time, they have aged, so I can see if someone's trying to get into it now, how they would not necessarily have the same connection with it, but the elements of what within these games has really defined other games. A great example is in Eco, you're this boy with horns, and you get locked in this castle. You find this girl who then helps you open up doors. You're kind of taking her through the castle to help you get out and escaping the castle together. And it's one of the first and one of the best uses of having two people, not dual protagonists, but having like a protagonist and then a side protagonist alongside them. You're playing as only one of them, but you've got the side protagonist there. And how that is not just part of the story, but that's actually part of the gameplay. The story isn't impacted by the idea of you're holding Yorda's hand going through. That is a symbol of how they're creating a bond. And there's even a bit where one of them falls, the other one like goes and grabs their hand, and it's like such an important part of the gameplay, but then it also builds on the story, and it's just chef's kiss. And that kind of relationship of being fundamental part of a game inspired things like The Last of Us, where you've got that really strong bond between these two characters. God of War, where you've got Kratos and Atreus. Yeah, it's just really fundamental and kind of paved the way for how to, one, tell a good story, but also how to make the gameplay key to that story. Yeah, I just think it's phenomenal and just a really well done example of how to do it. And kind of going on to what Ben was talking about as well, I think it does the silent protagonist trope really well, because it is a similar kind of thing of these characters are speaking a different language, so we don't know what they're saying when they are communicating, but it's kind of you're silently going around. All the communication is done through body language, like the hand holding or gesturing and yelling out a command. They don't say a specific language or specific command. They just kind of yell at each other to be like, hey, come over here or go up on to that thing. And it's all very body language and interpreting, and these two individuals who know nothing about each other forming this connection. Just really cool how it all plays together. So yeah, haven't really played them in a while, so I can see how it was easily forgotten, but with it being like the PS2 and PS3 era. But then Shadow of the Colossus did have a PS4 remake, which they also added in a fun little kind of extra bit of content to do, and they had this whole idea of you going around the Forbidden Lands. For context, it's this game game where you start the game where you walk into this forbidden world and then you have to explore and find all these big colossus and then defeat them one by one. So by design, it's this kind of ruined, forgotten world. So it's very desolate, but the gameplay is heavily based on these colossus. It's like a game of bosses, which is really cool and really different for the time. And as you explore like the desolate world, they kind of realized, oh, there's not really much to do around this world. So they added in this feature where you would go around and then your controller would give off a little audio signal to tell you that there was like a collectible nearby, and you'd have to get, I think it was like 70 of these collectibles, and then you'd get like a secret area would unlock in the map and you could get this amazing sword, which is just like a fun little thing that they added on. They kept the nature of the game in the remastered, but then just added on a little fun thing. So I really like that. And then on top of that, just great replay value with the bonus trials. And then they would unlock special perks that you would get. I think one of them, you get better swords, you can get things that give you more health, just little tiny perks that would be something trivial in a normal game, but this was a big step up in this game. So it really allowed you to play it a bit more differently. There was one that was a parachute, which just unlocks so much more of the map because you can now jump off things and parachute over to places that you would never be able to normally reach, which is really cool. So it's that element of the more you put into it, the more you get out of it, which is really nice, and hidden content as well. That's not to say there isn't problems with these games. The amazing part about these games as well is just the puzzles. Another thing that I think they really influenced later games, God of War, for example, is just with the puzzle and the area design. It was just awesome. And you'd have those moments like you'd have in Dark Souls where you're like, oh, I see a place over there. And then you'd go explore, do a little bit, and then you'd be like, oh, I'm in that place now. Love when games can do that kind of stuff. Not to say that because they are dated games, there are some mechanics that are a little bit clunky. While the game is giving you that kind of handhold mechanic to kind of make you go, oh, I'm bonded to this character, the AI is then insufferable. So there'll be a moment where there's a big ladder and you're like, I need you to go up this ladder. And she goes halfway up and then comes back down. And then you're there waiting like, get off the ladder, get off the ladder.
I'd be screaming.
Yeah, you would definitely be screaming. So it's not without its little bit of clunk. But I think just for the atmosphere and for the music, the storytelling, just these games are just some of my favorite experiences ever in video games. And I have a love-hate relationship with, I get why they did it during its first release of the sparse lands within Shadow of the Colossus, because obviously it was a hardware issue. They wouldn't be able to fill this whole world. But it was kind of the first stepping stone onto the big wide open worlds that we have today. But because of the limitations, obviously it's very dead and sparse and it's beautiful, but there's not much to do. So while there could have been this big world here with people and cities and things, there isn't much. Even if it was like you could go around and you could find hidden notes that would tell you the story of the civilization that used to be here or something, but the whole idea is the Forgotten Lands. There is no story to tell. So while they bury it under story elements, it is a shame that there's not much more to do in the actual overworld or way to progress your character as you're going from boss to boss. It is just literally a game full of bosses. Even if they added in some sort of Legend of Zelda survival or hunger element, that could have been a cool way to kind of add more without taking away the core idea of the Forgotten Worlds. But yeah, I just love those games. They're great. Yeah, oh my god, sorry, I just went on a huge spiel there, but I just love those games so much.
So, if we do some special mentions, if I give you 30 seconds, right?
Oh god,
so Will,
okay.
You're up first. I'm going to start timing when I say go. You've got 30 seconds to give me some special mentions. Ready?
Okay.
3, 2, 1, go.
Special mentions: Mass Effect 1 and 3, Skyrim, Mountain Blade Warband, Ghost of Tsushima, Helldivers 2, Darksiders 1, Darkest Dungeon, Age Mythology / Unreal Tournament, Assassin's Creed series, Pre-Origins, Dragon Age Origins, Dishonored, and Dawn of War 1 and 2.
Were you looking at your Steam list when you did that?
Nope, I memorised them beforehand.
Holy shit. That's
There's no
impressive.
time to go through it all.
God damn, that's like 16 seconds. You just fired them all off.
Oh yeah.
Holy
I even came up with like a sentence for each one, but I was like, I'm not going to get through them in 30 seconds.
Oh, right, fair enough. Oh yeah, special mentions to me, I guess, are things like, Ark Survival Evolved, not Survival Ascended, that doesn't exist. 7 Days to Die, Minecraft, Portal. I was going to say all the Resident Evil games, but no, what I really mean is Resident Evil 7 and the remakes of 2 and 3. Games like House Flipper, and of course Zombie Defense.
Gotta put it there.
Yeah, honestly, this just goes to show, like, I tend to just cycle through the same games every year. So...
Okay, Johnny, what are your special mentions? 3, 2, 1, go.
So Portal 2, Spider-Man PS5, God of War 2018. Resident Evil series, I couldn't pick one, but maybe like 7 or 4 are kind of high up on mine. Assassin's Creed, standouts being Origins, AC2 or AC Unity, Marvel's Midnight Suns, and Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Oh.
Kind of top standing out ones for me that I could think off the top of my head. There's probably more, but heyo.
That's 30 seconds.
So thanks everyone for listening to our very first podcast. Give us a like if you enjoyed the video, and we'd love to hear what your top 3 games are in the comment section below. Subscribe for more gaming content and podcast chats like this one.